to Let's Talk Early Years, the podcast where we navigate the heart, the craft, and the courage of early years education. I am your host, Melanie Karim, and in studio with me today, Stephanie Martin. Today we are talking beyond the words, because in earlier settings where emotions can often run really high and relationships matter, how we communicate and speak can make all the difference. Welcome in studio, Stephanie Martin.
It's beautiful to be back.
To be back.
Yes. But also I feel like I'm in a new studio.
It is.
Fabulous.
This is our new look. Thank you so much.
Thank you for
On
having
point,
me.
on brand, as you know.
All about, I feel you as soon as I walk in. And it's also so playful for early years, so I love it.
Thank you.
Very much here for it.
You and I connected. We met when I noticed your brand in a room full of vendors. Your brand was the standout brand. And dare I mention SIP on set? Is that okay?
You're allowed to. It's out there now.
Beautiful. And you are
Thank
the
you.
creator behind the concept, right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
So SIP is my other, I told you last time, I'm a bit of a Rubik's Cube. The other side of me. The founder of a small
The
business.
fun, creative side of you.
And it really gave me that outlet because I think branding does that for you. Sometimes in education, I think we're so used to the box that we're put in, and it's nice to also let the creative side of us out.
Absolutely.
So I'm seeing this with you, and I love it.
Thank you. I love that, and I love that for our audience as well, Stephanie. I mentioned to you as you arrived that in a previous episode I interviewed Kelly Lindbergh speaking about branding. And so your lovely comment and compliment on our branding on set here just really touches my soul.
It's fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you. I feel like I'm in, I don't know, a fantasy world of fun. I just want to stay here all day.
Thank you.
So great work, Kelly, and you.
Stephanie, for the ladies that don't know you, for the gentlemen too, who is Stephanie Martin?
Stephanie Martin is a lot of things. I always say this is the hardest question to answer. So to put it briefly, I always liken myself to a bit of a Rubik's Cube. There's a lot of sides to me. I'm an educator, formerly. I've been in education for 15 years.
Who has successfully pivoted. And this is mind-blowing for every educator, particularly in the early years, where we don't often see the direction of where the pivot could really go. You are one of those standout brands and businesses who has successfully just blown it out of the park. Tell us about that.
I feel like I'll just leave it there. You make me feel so. Look at how much straighter I'm sitting. Okay, so. And I think that is an important thing to say because as an educator, as leaders in education, we do so many things, we wear so many hats. And I've only now really seen the full circle of how much you can use those skills. They're very transferable to the real world.
Yes.
And so, as you were saying, I've now pivoted. I have an education consulting company called Advanced Consultants. We work with schools, nurseries, and also universities to provide difference in professional development because we are about implementing change and driving forward, the future of education. So that's really my why, my impact. I'm also a professional public speaker, and that is really my other why. Education and communication and helping organizations and also, so not just professionals, everyday people understand the art and the science of communication because as we're about to talk a little more in depth about today, it is the basis of everything we do. And so my program and coaching, She Speaks Coaching, really pushes that and pushes in the 21st century, 2025, we are in a world where it's louder than ever, there's more noise than ever. How can we actually communicate in a way where our message lands and we are always making an impact for our listener? So
and
that's me.
We're in that intersection. Stephanie, I am leveraging on your skill as an educator, as a professional speaker, as an entrepreneur. I want to bring all of those personas into the studio today. I just love that I know you. I just love that I can lean into your experience and share you with the rest of the early years community. I want to just tell you thank you.
And Mel, likewise. I think we both understand that our paths crossed at the most random random time. And again, you met me not as an educator,
Yes.
not as a speaker, not as a researcher in academia, but you met me as a small business owner and a mum. And so that really is the other side of me, is health and wellness, a mother, an expat. We're also South African.
Yes.
So there's so many facets, hence the Rubik's Cube. But I think that these sort of conversations and connections are wonderful because we learn so much from each other's experiences and also our expertise as well. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Likewise. It's a privilege to know you, I should say.
Thank you. Stephanie, you're the academic, you're the mom, you're the entrepreneur. You know and you've experienced the difficult conversations. Why is it important that we navigate those conversations with an elevated tone? You always speak about elevating oneself. You always speak about that. And I know I've said this to you before also, that when I'm in your presence, I feel like I have permission to be an elevated version of myself. I feel so up there. You know, you bring that energy to me and I know to your communities. I've sat in some of your trainings. You bring that energy that just says, girl, you've got permission to be your best self. So in our difficult conversations where energies are high, and we are females, emotions can be running high. Why is it so important to bring that tone, that elevated tone into our conversation?
Well, Mel, you have said it all. Energy. Energy is everything. Energy and everything that we do is a negotiation. And I think that is the basis of a dialogue with somebody else or with many people. We are always negotiating. We're either negotiating space, who's going to talk first, who's going to talk next. We're also negotiating perhaps if it's an issue, what's the outcome of that issue going to be? I even negotiate with my 3-year-old, and I'm sure you've been there yourself.
Those difficult conversations.
Right, difficult conversations.
Definitely,
All
yes.
mother listeners or father listeners would understand, and educators in early years would understand that there are several negotiations, sometimes multiple times in a minute, right? So that's the basis of it. The energy that you bring to that dialogue makes or breaks the outcome of that conversation and in turn the outcome of the negotiation. So what I liken communication to, it's not about speaking, it's not about talking, it's not even about noise, it's about the energy that we are always bringing across, sending and receiving to the other person or to our listeners. We are in control of our energy, believe it or not. And so in high stakes environments, in difficult conversations, it's imperative that you're actually in check with yourself and that you're also able to read the other person's energy.
So you're saying we need to take time. And you and I spoke about this in a previous episode, that you need to take time to sing to yourself.
Absolutely.
And I want to say, you're saying it's a negotiation. When we're having a difficult conversation, it's a negotiation as opposed to a confrontation.
I love that. Should we put it on a t-shirt? Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because
yes.
I think that as women, you know, and I love my sisters and I love my colleagues, but I think we just bring that extra elevated energy to those difficult conversations, and it can sometimes feel like a confrontation. So I love that you're saying it's a negotiation, ladies, and we are all on the same page, hoping for the best outcome
Absolutely.
after this conversation.
Exactly.
Right? There's no, the winner is going to be both of us having come out of the conversation feeling that we've been heard.
Well, let's talk about the winning word,
Right.
okay? Because sometimes it's a myth, and I want to just really, I guess, talk a little bit more deeply about that. Because sometimes we've heard of that saying, well, it's a win-win situation. It's a win for you and it's a win for me.
Yes.
Sometimes it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes in a conversation where you do need to confront a situation, perhaps when you're giving feedback, let's pretend you're giving feedback as a leader to a colleague, to one of your staff, maybe that staff member isn't going to feel like it's a huge win for them immediately.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Because perhaps the outcome has already been decided, but we simply need to take them around, show them this is the situation, here is what we need to work towards. It's about bringing them along with you on the journey to that outcome, rather than throwing that outcome out there and saying, this is set and final. Halas, you don't have a say. It's about giving the person space to also negotiate. A win-win might look like 60-40, 70-30, 70% my way, 30% your way. But we have to both come to the agreement that we are on board with whatever the outcome is and be okay with that. And that's where that satisfaction comes in. We actually leave the conversation, as you said, feeling there's a bit of growth. There's more of an opening in our perspective, perhaps. Maybe we understand the person a little better. And that in itself is the win. Sometimes the win is not getting what I want. Sometimes the win is having my mind opened and understanding a situation better and growing from that experience or that conversation.
So from my perspective as a leader, I want to maybe give an example. Calling somebody into a disciplinary meeting. Right? I am feeling anxious, nervous of their response to what I'm about to say. I'm feeling a little bit disappointed because calling them into a meeting probably means that we've had this conversation a few times, you know, just, hey, can you make sure that perhaps you just make sure that you're not late every day. Let's use a silly example as tardiness.
Right.
So make sure that you're not late every day. Which happens. It happens to the best of us. But now it's, in our example, becomes something chronic.
Yes.
And so it's time to call you into the manager's office and for you to sit in the hot seat. And so I'm already bringing an energy to that space.
Yes.
And here's this person also coming in with that energy of anxiety, stress, maybe defensiveness, you know, in that situation, anticipation of the worst possible outcome of this negotiation, as you've now termed it, you know. But I don't think we often go into this perceiving it as the pause. You speak about that.
You know, I love pause.
Yes.
It's one of pausing and breathing is the most powerful tool to having harmonious relationships in any company. It doesn't matter what industry it is, through conversation and communication.
Right.
When there is a lack of pause, there is a lack of thinking. When there is a lack of breathing, there is an increase in your cortisol, which increases your stress, your anxiety. You actually don't have enough space mentally to compartmentalize and for your brain to think of what's going to come next. That's when we see quite hot-handed, heavy-handled responses. People firing things out of their mouth without thinking or filtering, in the heat of the moment, if you like, because we're reacting to our energy and our emotional energy, I should say. So there's a couple of things, and you raised some great points, because it happens, we're human. The point is not to delete your emotions, by the way, ever. The point is to feel them and observe them, but not let them control what you say. We're not going to just react to our emotions and respond out of that. So let's just bring it back to that scenario where you're sitting with someone, you've got to have this difficult conversation. It is a tricky situation to be in. It's not a nice situation to be in most of the time. No one wants to have a confrontational conversation. Breathing and pausing allows you to center yourself, allows you to think of what the best opening to this conversation would be. And I want to talk about, you said the word elevating a conversation. There's 3 different types, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to explain those 2, because it's important we just understand the difference so we can manage a conversation. Managing a conversation means come into my office, sit down, let's tick the boxes and say we have this conversation, let's sign off, this is what's going to happen, the end.
Right.
We've ticked a box.
Right. We've
done our job on paper.
Right.
Absolutely.
And by HR and by company standards and by policy.
Procedures.
And I'm busy. I've got other things, right?
And there is a place for managerial conversations that don't warrant the depth that I'm about to explain to you.
Right.
So there is a time and place for each of these types of conversations. One of them probably not so much. The second type of conversation that we see happening where there's a confrontation is the escalation. And there's a difference between elevating and escalating. Now, when we see a conversation moving towards being escalated, it means that we've done what you just said. We've come in with anxious energy or angry energy, really, really quite negative energy, let's put it that way, or energy that has an ability to fire a negative outcome. That's what it is. So You've come in anxious. I've come in stressed, wondering what this meeting's about. You choose to straight away say to me what I've not done right and question it and tell me you've told me 5 times already and this is my last warning. Straight away, what do you think my reaction's going to be? I'm on edge.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's negative.
It's negative and I'm on edge.
Right.
Maybe depends on the type of person you're dealing with. I might be defensive. I might already have my excuses or reasoning ready to go. I might fire them back at you. I might also turn away in fear and shame. That's also a response.
Right.
And so what we need to ask ourselves there is, where is this conversation going to lead us later? Is the person, after leaving this conversation in this room, going to leave feeling negative, angst, maybe resentment towards a leader or a colleague?
Yeah.
And what good is that going to do our nursery or our early years centre?
Right.
So that's the escalating part. Perhaps there's probably a more dramatic side where it's quite aggressive, where tones are elevated, where volumes are elevated, where unprofessional things are said. So that's escalating.
Right.
When we look at elevating a conversation, it doesn't mean that we're being super nice, okay? Because that's important. I see your hands going up.
Yeah.
It's important that we realise that you can have a hard conversation and still be a good person. You can have a hard conversation, you can be a nice person, a great person, and still be assertive, okay? And still call a spade a spade. Right. So when we are elevating a conversation, the outcome is different because we're doing 3 things differently, and I call it the 3 E's, okay? First off, we're going to empathise. When we begin a conversation, I see the smile with empathy. I'm connecting with you as a person first.
Right.
The issue is still on the table between you and I, but I'm checking in with the person who's sitting in the seat opposite me.
Right.
Okay?
The human part.
Connecting
Yes.
to the person. Once we've done that, it breaks the ice. It levels the playing field as well, particularly as a leader. If you've said, and you know I say this, come into my office, let's have a chat. Most times people get worried. What does this mean for me? Okay? So that just breaks the ice a little. They're still a human being regardless of whatever you've got to discuss.
Right.
The second thing is energy, and you've just mentioned it. Checking in internally with what is my energy before I go to speak and have this conversation. If you know you're someone who gets anxious, who stresses, who really doesn't like confrontation, but it's part of the job, breathe. Check in with yourself, because whatever energy you're harnessing, they're going to feel it the second you come in.
Yes.
100%, it's going to get projected.
Yeah.
Particularly when we're angry and annoyed and frustrated, because you may have had this conversation several times. And in the same way, if the person comes into the room and they're frustrated and angry, we need to check their energy. So check your energy, check the person's energy, read it before speaking, because that might help you just adjust how you're going to start the conversation.
And perhaps pause and say,
Absolutely.
you know what, maybe this is not the right time of the day for us to be having this conversation.
100%.
You're stressed, I'm stressed, perhaps we can regroup tomorrow. This afternoon, maybe we can change the location, maybe we can go sit outside, where you're saying, let's bring some humanity to the difficult conversation. That maybe a different space would make this person feel less anxious.
Exactly.
Right? So this could be elevating our conversation too.
Exactly. And in your opinion, as someone who is a director and who's been a leader for so many years, is it difficult, do you think, to change the location of a meeting?
No.
Sometimes in the moment we're busy.
Yeah,
But if we give it thought.
and I want to stay there. That intentionality goes back to your first point. That what do I want the outcome of this conversation to be?
Exactly.
I want there to be a positive outcome. I want there to be a win-win situation.
Exactly.
Whatever
and we want mutual respect, don't we, as well?
Yes.
And so that is the 30, which is expansion. At the end of the conversation, we want there to be expansion. And I always say to people when we're doing these trainings, it's about coming out of the conversation. Maybe it's not a win-win, which we just spoke about, but there's growth. There's perhaps a deeper establishment of trust between two people.
Yes.
And there's a better understanding of the other person, but also perhaps a shift in mindset. perhaps there's a shift in the person's perception and perspective. Maybe they came in feeling defensive, but through the way that you handle the conversation, they've come out going, do you know what, I need to do better.
Yes.
Or do you know what, Melanie could have come at me really hard because this is my 5th time, but she didn't, and I respect her for that.
Right.
And that's when people's perception, particularly of leaders and colleagues, changes
Right.
in how we deal with the situation
Right.
when it's high stakes.
Oh.
So it's the, empathy, connecting,
Yes.
them reading our energy and their energy, and then the expansion. We're always trying to achieve that expansion, and that's the goal. That's the win.
We want to grow from our conversations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Let me think. Where else do I want to go with this?
I touched on a few things because there is so much to say in your brilliant questions.
Leadership. Okay.
We're good, Akil? Okay.
Stephanie, let's talk leadership. What are some of the most common mistakes we're making when we're talking underperformance?
When it's about performance particularly, the biggest mistake I see most leaders making is not regulating the emotion before having the conversation. So that's the energetic check-in.
Right.
Okay. The other mistake, and it's such a simple thing. We do it with the children. We sometimes fail to do it with our staff. The positive reinforcement. So again, when you're having this conversation, there's 4 things that I say are important to remember as a leader. Number 1 is, am I connecting with the person? Number 2 is, do I understand the person? Number 3, am I actively listening? And this goes both ways, but for a leader it's important. And number 4, I just forgot number 4, Melanie.
It's okay.
Let me just say my 4 things. I was so in the moment.
Number 1.
Sorry.
Go again.
So there's 4 things that I say are imperative. Okay, when you're a leader approaching a conversation, particularly about performance.
Right.
When it's something that's quite high stakes, sometimes not a great conversation to have, we want to check in with 4 things. Have I connected with the person?
Right, that empathy.
The empathy, exactly, connecting with the human being. The second being, do I understand this person? Okay, so am I just understanding generally where this person's coming from? Do I know my staff is also very, very important
That's
as a
so
leader
profound,
to check in.
Stephanie.
Because
That's so profound. I feel like you've touched something there. I feel like very often, especially when we're managing big teams, maybe 30 staff members, as a leader myself, it's really, really challenging to know everyone and to understand their background and where they're coming from and their life situations.
Absolutely.
I want the teams out there, the educators out there, to hear my heart speaking from a leadership perspective. It is not that we are too busy to care. It is not. It is just a lot for one person to manage and to know and to extend their energy to understand where you're coming from. I know that you expect this from us as leaders, and we do try to sit in that whole seat, and to empathize and to feel you and to understand the challenges that you might be experiencing, in your public transport or whatever the case might be, getting to work.
Yeah.
But I really, really want to just lay it out for everyone that understanding is something that takes time and investment.
investment is the word. Exactly. And I think, Melanie, you say it so beautifully, but it's not just about the leader. This is for everyone.
Yeah.
This is for your teachers, teacher to teacher, teacher to TA, teacher to parent, teacher to leader. Also understanding your leaders and how they work. And not just running in with a problem. Have you asked your leader, how are you doing, Melanie, today?
It's
It's
mutual
a two-way
here.
street.
Yes.
It's a two-way street. And you're right, because I was mentioning, and I love that you've been very vulnerable and real about that, because I think we need to be. the work of educators and educational leaders is no mean feat.
No.
And I think you've
Not
said
at
that
all.
enough times on this podcast
Yeah.
for people to understand. And I hope those who are not in education, who are listening, can understand that we are in the business of human improvement,
Yeah.
not just for the children, for our staff and for ourselves.
Yes.
That is noble work.
Yes.
It's profound work.
Absolutely.
So coming back to the 4 things that I think are essential when you're having this kind of conversation, obviously connecting, we spoke about that, understanding who it is you're connecting with, at least, as much as you can.
Yeah.
The third being, am I actively listening to this person, or am I just waiting to hurry up and get my point out? And I know that when it is a busy environment, time was done yesterday.
Yeah.
There's never enough of it.
Yeah.
Okay, we needed that done yesterday. So you do need to pause and to actively listen. Actively listening being, nothing's in my hands, and I'm giving you eye contact. And my body language shows that, like we are right now, I'm receiving what it is you have to say. Okay? Again, that's a two-way street.
Yes.
The last part of that, which I think is probably the most important, and that comes back to a model that I really like working with. It's old, but it's brilliant. The DISC model
Right.
is, do I understand this person's pain points and triggers?
Right.
Because when you understand a person's pain points and triggers, and this is trial and error, you can't know until you've had the difficult conversation and maybe watched it go a little sour.
Right.
You know how to handle this person when you're perhaps having to navigate through murky waters or difficult waters in a conversation.
I'm hearing you say, and sorry to interrupt you
No,
there, but I'm hearing you say that as leaders, we have got to elevate our emotional intelligence here. So it's for us. We're leaders for a reason. Yeah, and so
Absolutely.
like you're saying, the time constraints, the busyness of the day can no longer be our excuse. We need to arrive as our elevated selves, and it starts with regulating our emotions,
Absolutely.
intentionally connecting with our teams. Yeah, so making that time to get to know them, to get to understand
Yes.
them.
And that requires investment.
Yes.
Which is exactly what you said.
Yeah.
It is the most, if not, yes, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it is the most important foundation building block of your entire organization, Melody. And the thing is, resources, facilities, beautiful different, materials in your classroom, the curriculum, safeguarding, all of that is built on the foundation of communication. If your team is not having the ability to, or if they don't have the ability to effectively communicate, then there's going to be a breakdown somewhere. That's the honest truth.
Absolutely.
There's going to be a breakdown in our systems.
Absolutely.
And so everything stems from how we receive and send information to each other,
Right.
whether that's via email or whether that's verbally.
Right.
Yeah.
And so understanding our triggers. And again, I'm going back to, we need to understand our own triggers.
Yes.
Yeah, going into these difficult conversations.
Absolutely.
So it's pause for reflection for us, as we're elevating ourselves and elevating our speaking ability and our communication skills, that we take the time to be reflective practitioners,
Yes.
to reflect on what are the things that absolutely drive me ballistic in a conversation. For me, it's the clicking of a pen, Stephanie.
Why is that it's so annoying?
It is so distracting for
is.
me,
It
I've
is.
very often,
It takes me back to the classroom. Stop.
like, gosh, I would say to my colleagues or to my team members, like, just, and sometimes abruptly, just like, please, I'm speaking.
Because it's distracting.
It's
I fully
distracting.
understand.
But now I know that this is something that triggers me. You get what I'm
So
saying?
out of interest, if I can ask you a question now, how do you deal with that trigger? Because the second half of that, yes, I could identify this is what annoys me and this is what triggers me.
Right.
But the world ain't got to stop for us.
Exactly.
So how am I going to manage that?
Yes.
It's the same as, look, if I can be honest, we're being vulnerable here. Road rage in Dubai really can test
Can
me
trigger.
sometimes.
Yeah.
If I allow it every day to create the world that I live in, and if I react to it, then really it's going to influence how my day goes.
Yes.
And I'm always going to start this day feeling triggered.
Yes.
But how I manage to deal with that trigger, that's what the important thing is. So for you, the pen clicking,
Yeah.
if I can ask, how do you manage that?
I look
Or
for
how
the
did you?
hearts. Mel Robbins says in one of her podcasts, she says, when you're feeling stressed or anxious, look around the room and look for the hearts. Look at 5 things that you can
Yes.
kind of imagine looks like a heart. And so your attention moves from that space of instant
brilliant.
trigger, of instant anxiety or stress, and you look around the room and your focus just shifts. So heads up to Mel
I love
Robbins.
that. Thank you, Mel. I also
Yeah.
love her let them theory because that is part of it, isn't it? Is that this person, so to come back to the triggers and your own triggers, great, I have a trigger. Okay, this person has a trigger. What are we going to do about it?
Yes.
So this is where, and I spoke, I think last time when we sat down and had a conversation about DISC.
Yes.
The DISC model being some people are dominant, some people are the influence type. Generally, those people take up more, I shouldn't say take up more energy, but they have more energy, they're more outgoing openly, and they can be more of a dominant force in conversation. Then you also have the steady and compliant types who perhaps might take a back seat, are more passive, they internalize a little bit more. They are all, those 4 types, going to respond differently
Yeah.
to a confrontational conversation. Yeah.
Yes.
And so just understanding that in your staff, that requires the investment, like you said,
Yeah.
to go back and understand who I'm working with on my team, and for your team to also understand each other.
So when those emotions are running high, besides the pause and the elevation that we're going to do, our reflection, what are just some internal methods that we can use just to bring our energy down or to an equilibrium, Stephanie, in that space?
In the space, and space is really the operative word here. You need to allow yourself space. Sometimes when someone is coming at you with information, perhaps that you don't want to hear, perhaps you've delivered information and then you're getting defense back, and it's quite frustrating. We've been on the end of that when the person is just going for the defense and the reasoning and the rebuttal. Yes, breath is your first point of call because then it's going to allow you to pause. I also say as a leader, know when a conversation is going nowhere.
Ooh.
Know when a conversation is going nowhere, because if that person is becoming, let's say, quite aggressive in their mode of conversation with you, their mode of communication, you have to ask yourself, how much am I going to get out of this?
Yeah.
Or at this point of the conversation, what's next? Where are we going to go to from here? So pausing and breathing allows you to ask yourself, how is this person taking the information, firstly? Can I see the end in sight? Can I still see my end goal in sight? Sometimes you have to check in with yourself. Teachers know this halfway through the lesson. If your kids are not in that space to be able to, we need to shelve that lesson and perhaps switch up the activity.
Right.
The same goes for conversations.
Yes.
And it's such a small thing, but even just allowing, maybe that person does need 30 seconds to remove themselves and come back in.
Yeah.
And Mel, here's the thing about emotion that I think is important for leaders to remember, but everyone to remember. An emotion scientifically only lasts for around about 30 seconds.
But the impact.
I know. But how long we choose to allow that emotion to infiltrate our mind is up to us.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, if you take a breath and pause, and I know this myself sitting in traffic, I can respond with my horn and my blinkers,
Right.
or I can sit.
Right.
And I can take that breath and I can pause. And while it sounds a little too meditative for some people listening, watch what happens the next time you're feeling a strong emotion.
Yeah.
What happens
you
is
sit
after a
with
while
it.
it fades.
Right.
It does fade within that 30 seconds. So when
Right.
you pause and when you also allow that person to pause and stop speaking, you're allowing that emotion to just come back down to earth. They get grounded, they're centered, and then perhaps that conversation can move forward. So they would be my 3 tips.
I love it. Stephanie, parents.
Yes.
We've spoken so much about our teams and the challenging conversations. Parents can be emotionally invested too. Help me with the tone that I'm going to approach these conversations with. And also, I want to say on the back end of that, that in this day of modern technology where we get our reviews online, where these conversations when they go south, it gets posted online. This can affect the business. This can affect your career potentially, positively or negatively, most times negatively if it's going online. Help us to navigate that space.
Well, let's bring it back to parents first and foremost and their place in the whole stakeholder relationship.
Mm-hmm.
A parent sends their child to outside care for a reason, to be cared for in place of themselves. Now, Mel, you're a parent, I'm a parent, and I want you just to think for a second, when your child was at school, for you as a mother, what was the most important thing that you wanted for your own child? And it probably stems from, I want them to be safe, and I want them to feel cared for, and I want them to feel happy and that there's a sense of belonging.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So most parents, if you speak to them, those are the three things that they want. When they come in with a problem, 9 times out of 10, it is coming from a place of fear. And most parents aren't aware of that. The fear of, and it's fierce protection, it's fierce love, it's fierce defense of their child because they just want the best for their child, as I do, as you do.
Right.
So if we go back to those 3 E's, that connecting and empathizing with the parent first, it's not optional, it's crucial, I would say.
Yeah.
Because you need to make the parent feel seen and make them feel heard. That's where your active listening comes in. Now, sometimes you can be in a situation where you don't feel like listening that day because you may have had it with that particular difficult conversation and maybe the way that the parent has chosen to go about this conversation.
Right.
And I know educators and leaders have been in this place before. I want you to think of, if you think of your tone as a thermometer, like a temperature gauge, your tone can do 2 things. It creates the atmosphere. If you come in with a cold tone, then the entire room freezes or the listener freezes.
What would a cold tone look like?
So let's say, for example, that you're a parent, you've come to me with an issue, and I've said, well, that's not something we do here. I'm dismissive, I'm cold, there's no care, there's no warmth. Does that parent feel seen and heard?
No.
Definitely not. So I've literally just frozen them off, okay? If, on the other hand, my temperature, the tone of my temperature is too hot, it's overheated, then the energy is going to change and become overheated. So let's pretend again this parent has come to me with an issue and I choose to say, well, that's not my responsibility, that is your responsibility as a parent. Wow, that dynamic has totally shifted. As a parent, I'm going to get defensive, I'm going to feel shame, I may feel frustration, angry. That's when we see these things escalating, as we said before. If I can regulate my tone, coming back to the breath, cool, calm, collected, and be neutral, and engage those 3 E's. I've checked in, I've empathized. I hear what you're saying there, Melanie. I understand that's quite frustrating.
Yes.
Here's what we want to be doing with a parent, especially when you're having a conversation maybe about the child's development, maybe about their lack of development in a particular area. Let them be seen, let them be heard, but then focus on how do we move forward from here. So as an example, perhaps you're having to have teachers a difficult conversation with a parent. I know it's interview time for many of you. So instead of saying, Melanie refuses to come and have circle time, every time it's circle time, she goes to the window and she's very disruptive. And she takes that dinosaur and she throws it at the window and the whole class is disruptive. And she doesn't listen and she's a bully.
Probably the feedback my mom would have received.
Probably, but yeah, I was going to say, well, maybe my mum, I'm not speaking from experience here. So as a parent, though, you're going to feel a little defensive, even if that's
shamed,
the version. And ashamed.
Embarrassed.
Exactly, because it falls back on them. They do take, most parents will feel that that is an attack on them. Okay, the child is, so, and saying that too, Mel, the other thing is some parents see a version of their child at home that is very different to the version of the child they see in the nursery.
Absolutely.
And this happens. And this happens. So this could also be news to them. They've never seen this version of the child.
Yes.
But if we remain, and the same with leaders when you're having a conversation as well with your staff, task orientated.
Yes. What do I want the outcome to be?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And that it's not an attack on the person, but rather this is the situation. So for example, after you've connected with the parent, you might then say, well, listen, this is what we've observed Melanie doing in class. This is what we perceive it might mean. We believe it might mean a couple of things, not Melanie has this, Melanie has that. This is a problem.
Yes.
And then here's how we'd like to move forward with Melanie. Here's the options that we're looking at.
I hear you saying let's bring positivity as opposed to negativity. Even having a difficult conversation can have a positive language and undertone. Is that correct?
Well, here's what I want to say about that. I think a lot of educators feel trapped, like they can't say what needs to be said, and that they have to sugarcoat everything. And that's not what I don't want people to feel as though you've got to sugarcoat everything. What we want to do is remove the emotion, the emotional labels, the negative aspect to it. We're not trying to say, Melanie, instead of doing circle time, has chosen to throw the dinosaur against the wall, and that really showcases her brilliance. You know, we're not going to go that far. We're going to neutralize it.
Yes.
And that, instead of making it negative, we're just taking off those negative associations and neutralizing and looking at things in a practical way. Being a bit more pragmatic in our approach.
Right. Stephanie,
Yes.
I always feel, even outside of the studio, like we never have enough time to chat.
Ever.
Never, right? So I am hoping we can still chat about our tone in email conversations, our tone in sending out our reports, our language. Perhaps there's a masterclass that we could lean into for you. I'm leaving it with you
I feel like
to
we
consider.
said this last time, and I think we need to
Can we do
that.
this?
I think
Can we do an
if you're
online?
Well, I think that it would be right now as well a perfect time and what you're doing here in this podcast is providing professional development for people on the go who need this. And this is what I'm most passionate about, is the impact and the accessibility. So let's do it, Mel.
Okay,
I'm ready.
so watch the space. Webinar coming up.
space.
Yeah. Stephanie, last words for our educators and leaders.
Yes. There's a brilliant, brilliant public speaker, Jim Rohn, who I've always looked up to, a huge inspiration of mine. One of the best things that he's ever said is, don't let your mouth overload your back. And as a leader and as an educator, I think that's something we always have to remember. Sometimes we can say too much and make empty promises that we know we can't do that. We can't keep it, particularly with parents. Sometimes we feel the need to say too many things and we put ourselves in a position where we are burning out because of that. Secondly, if you fail to pause, if you're someone who feels like they haven't worked their way through those emotional triggers, don't let your mouth overload your back. Meaning, don't let what you say in the heat of the moment come back to haunt you later and feel the repercussions of that. Take the time to understand yourself and understand those that you're dealing with, because at the end of the day, what we want is a harmonious place for everyone, all of our stakeholders, and for ourselves. Just to come into work and feel that this is a place of positivity and of growth for everybody. So don't let your mouth overload your back.
Love it. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. That was Stephanie Martin reminding us that tone is leadership and that every conversation is an opportunity to build trust and avoid tension. If you have enjoyed our episode, I would love for you to send us your comments, write us your reviews on Instagram, on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. This is Let's Talk Early Years. See you next time.